The year was 1975. The then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi declared a state of emergency. The fundamental rights of the citizens were taken away for next 2 years. The democracy was destroyed and dictatorship was established in India. And those 2 years are still being considered the darkest period of Indian democracy. We talk about emergency a lot. But do we actually know what happened during emergency? Why emergency was imposed in the first place? What was the need for our former Prime Minister Mrs. Indira Gandhi to declare a state of emergency? Why did she do that? Is there any justifiable reason behind that? If so, what is that one particular reason? Let's find out today. So what is national emergency? National emergency is a situation where there's a restriction on the fundamental rights of the citizens. It's literally like a democratic nation is being converted into an autocratic one for a particular period of time. And this is legally possible under Article 352 of the Constitution. As per Article 352, an emergency can be declared if any extraordinary situation arises that may threaten the security, peace, stability and governance of the country. The Article 352 states that if the president is satisfied on the grounds that the security of the nation is threatened due to external aggression or armed rebellion, he can declare an emergency. So national emergency can be declared for 3 reasons. Number 1, due to war. Number 2, external aggression. And number 3, internal disturbances. And this could be surprising for you. 1975 was not the first time India went through an emergency. Before that, independent India faced emergency 2 times. The first emergency was declared by Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru in 1962 when Indo-China war broke out. During this emergency, the government increased its power to control the media and the ability to detain the common citizens of India without any trial. Even though the war ended within a month, Nehru did not revoke the emergency and it was officially lifted after 5.5 months in 1968. The second emergency was declared by former Prime Minister Indira Gandhi in 1971 when Indo-Pakistan war broke out. Although the war ended in 2 weeks, the state of emergency was not lifted until 1977, which was almost 6 years. With the second emergency still in force, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi declared India's third emergency on 25th June 1975. And this emergency was very different from the previous 2 because those 2 emergencies were declared on the basis of external aggression, which means India was fighting battles with China and Pakistan. So it didn't directly affect the common people of India, even though it was in force for a longer time. So what was the reason for the third emergency? It all started with the 1971 Lok Sabha elections when Congress got a massive victory, securing 352 seats out of 518. Indira Gandhi won from the Rabareilly constituency by defeating her opponent Raj Narayan by 1,10,000 votes. But Raj Narayan filed an election petition in the Allahabad High Court challenging Indira Gandhi's victory. An election petition is something that is filed directly in the High Court questioning the election of a particular candidate, and such petition has to be filed within 45 days of the declaration of the election results. Section 123 of the RP Act, that is the Representation of the People Act, mentions that if a particular candidate was involved in certain corrupt practices, the election of that particular candidate can be declared invalid. So Raj Narayan raised a list of allegations against Mrs. Gandhi, but most of them were turned down by the High Court, which means most of the allegations were dismissed by the court. But the High Court did consider 2 significant findings on which Indira Gandhi's election was invalidated. So what are those 2 significant findings against Mrs. Gandhi? Number 1, the use of government machinery to set up stage and loudspeakers. The placement of stages, loudspeakers, barricades and the posting of policemen for Mrs. Gandhi's election campaign was arranged by Yashpal Kapoor, the district magistrate and the superintendent of police of Rabareilly and the Home Secretary of Uttar Pradesh government, and this is a violation of law. Number 2, use of government officer as an election agent. The second finding against Mrs. Gandhi was the employment of Yashpal Kapoor as an election agent. Yashpal Kapoor was a gazetted officer in Government of India. He was on a special duty in Prime Minister's Secretariat, but he did submit submitted his resignation and then was appointed as an election agent. So what was the problem then? Listen carefully, this is where it gets complicated. Yashpal had submitted his resignation on January 13, 1971 and his resignation was accepted the very next day. Since he was working on a special duty at Prime Minister's Secretariat, he also need their approval. So their approval came only on January 25th, 1971. Then he was appointed as the election agent of Mrs. Indira Gandhi on February 4th, 1971. So the problem here is he was a government officer until January 25th, 1971. But he did deliver election speeches on behalf of Mrs. Gandhi on January 7th and another speech on January 19th, 1971. And this, the usage of government officer as an election agent, is a violation of law under Article 123 of the RP Act. Based on these findings, on January 12, 1975, the Allahabad High Court had passed a judgment that Indira Gandhi had engaged in election fraud and banned her for 6 long years from holding elected positions, which means she'll also be unseated as the Prime Minister. Then an appeal was made in the Supreme Court, which allowed a partial stay on the judgment given by the Allahabad High Court on 24 June 1971. By this stay, she could continue as MP in Lok Sabha and could attend Parliament House meetings until next hearing, but she could not participate in its proceedings or vote as an MP. Most importantly, the Supreme Court allowed her to continue as the Prime Minister until next hearing, but she was not satisfied with that. She wanted a complete stay on the judgment given by the Allahabad High Court. I personally feel the punishment given to her, that was the dethroning as Prime Minister and 6 years ban in politics, was way too harsh for those 2 minor violations, considering she was already the Prime Minister of India at that time. But we have a constitution here. Things has to work as per the constitution. So the stay given by the Supreme Court was not that a bad deal. She could have grabbed that, but she knew that was just a stay order. If she lost the case in future, she would have to step down as Prime Minister. There was only one thing left to do for her to escape the trial, that is, declare a state of emergency. She went straight to the then President Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed and advised him to declare a state of emergency. In her letter to the President, she wrote, "Information has reached us that indicate imminent danger to the security of India. The matter is extremely urgent." In 1978, in an interview with journalist Jonathan, Mrs. Gandhi was asked what was that exact danger to India's security that made her declare emergency, for which she simply replied, "It was obvious, isn't it? The whole subcontinent had been destabilized." But the only obvious reason we could see here is she being unseated as the Prime Minister and banned from politics for 6 years, which I really feel way too unfair for those minor violations. But she should have fought it legally. But being a Prime Minister, she literally turned a democratic nation into a dictatorship just because she was being punished. There are people justifying this, saying there was internal disturbances at that time. That's why she declared an emergency. There will be internal disturbances. What do you expect when a Prime Minister being dethroned? There was internal disturbance. But that disturbance was not against India, it was against Mrs. Gandhi. And there are people citing the protests that happened in Bihar and Gujarat as the reason for the declaration of emergency. But those protests happened in 1974 and the emergency was declared in 1975, that too right after the Supreme Court order. And there was no discussion about this in the parliament. Forget about discussion, most of the cabinet members were not even informed about this. They got to know just few hours before the announcement was made. So as per the advice of Mrs. Gandhi, the then President Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed declared a state of emergency on 25th June 1975. Within few hours, a lot of opposition party leaders were arrested, including L.K. Advani, Morarji Desai and J.P. Narayan. The power supply to the newspaper offices in Delhi were disconnected that night so that no newspaper could be printed. The very next morning, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi announced on the radio,
राष्ट्रपति जी ने आपातकाल की घोषणा की है। इससे आतंकित होने का कोई कारण नहीं है।
And thus began the darkest period of Indian democracy. The fundamental rights of the citizens were taken away. The common people who protested against it were arrested and convicted without any trial, and the numbers crossed 1 lakh. Imagine 1 lakh innocent people were arrested, and even the Congress leaders who spoke against it were made to resign their post and were arrested. And this list includes the freedom fighters too. And Sanjay Gandhi, son of Mrs. Indira Gandhi, was very brutal and autocratic in nature. He wanted to be the next successor of Congress. During the emergency period, he completely destroyed the slum areas in Delhi and carried out mass sterilization across India. Men, women, married as well as unmarried, were randomly taken from their homes, railway stations, farms, and was brought to camps for mass sterilization. What even more worse is, the medical procedures were done in an extremely obscure, unhygienic way. And it was not just men who suffered, even women were forced to get tubectomy done. 81 lakh people were totally sterilized in a year, and a considerable number of people died in the process. The emergency was finally withdrawn and democracy was restored on 21st March 1977 after 21 long months. But the people were so furious that both Indira Gandhi and her son Sanjay Gandhi got badly defeated in 1977 election, and Janata Party came to power. That was the first time a non-Congress government was established in India. Historian Ramachandra Guha criticized Mrs. Gandhi, saying she had an uncomfortable relationship with democracy. He also cited a conversation between Mrs. Gandhi and her friend wherein she said that democracy not only throws up the mediocre person but gives strength to the most vocal, howsoever they may lack knowledge and understanding. I personally admire Indira Gandhi, especially she has taken a lot of brave decisions in terms of foreign affairs, unlike her father. But this part, the emergency of 1975, will always remain a black spot, not just in her political career, but also in the history of Indian democracy.